Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
It's good to have you all here with us for another Sunday, for another lecture. A little bit colder, but it's going to warm up, so it's good. Yeah. Today, we're going to have our lecture by our friend Marco. We're going to be a talk about God. Very basic, simple subject, right, Marco? Just God. Yeah. But as always, before we have our lecture, we're going to have our friend Danny doing the initial reading for us.
Oh, almost fell. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
The opportunities of moral improvement that life allows us should be taken advantage of wisely and immediately. The march of time is inevitable, and an occasion neglected is lost forever. Time and wind never come back. Thus, it is a liberating blessing to utilize every opportunity for inner growth. Stay alert in order to take the most advantage of the hours of your earthly existence.
So let us all now close our eyes and elevate our thoughts and our hearts to God, our Creator, to Jesus, our Master, to all the good spirits here present at TSS. Thank for the opportunity of being here together to learn, to receive all this good energy that surrounds us. May the good spirits here enlighten and guide Marco during this lecture so we can learn a little bit more through the teachings that our Master Jesus brought to us. And so be it. Marco, it's all yours.
Good morning, everyone. Morning. Um, all right, so today we're gonna have a conversation about you guys. Conversation about God. I know. It's one of those things, right? Because when I was selecting the title, right, I was thinking about why not just say God, and then let's talk about it, right? Because it's fun to. It's just if you look around and you start thinking about ourselves. I mean, I can definitely connect to that very strongly. Is that we do? I think we all agree that yes, we believe in God, right? I don't think, at least here, we're not going to have that question that much. But even out there, you see kind of mix. Some people do, some people don't. But even for those that do believe, like a lot, right? And if you ask carefully, like, what is God? Like, I think most people are going to have a hard time answering that simple question, right? Because the reason for that, and I did a little bit of a historical reading about some of the history behind that term, God, but and the history about what we believe is kind of above us, some sort of creator, is that throughout humanity's history, the concept of God has changed dramatically over time, right? Different religions, different places, different beliefs, different times, right? And we tend to all put together all these different beliefs, ideas, concepts, everything, historical context together, right, under this one term that we call God, right? But if you ask individually, all around different cultures and civilizations over time and history, like pretty much every single uh, group and people and in history is going to believe in something that is somehow above us and more powerful in a way, right? And has somehow the ability of creating things. Like, that's a kind of a basic concept, right? It's almost like, yeah, there's something out there, right? That can, control the universe or create the universe or give us life, right? That's the kind of a principle. Now, in the past, if you go really, really early now, that seeding of understanding was inside people, right? But then, obviously, at that time, we probably incarnated at that time too. We would find this super powerful. entity, and we project that into things that we can't explain. Like, we look at the sun, right? Can't make the sun, right? So therefore, someone make that sun, right? So that's the basic philosophical concept behind it. So the sun is God, basically. It's like one. And then for almost every natural thing that cannot be explained easily, a type of divinity or concept of God was attached to it, right? That's why we have multi-gods. Like we have God of wind, God of sun, God of moon, God, like that changed over time, right? With time and this development of a more egocentric view of the universe, the concept of God started to embodied into some sort of a human-like figure, right? And that changed over time. So with time, instead of saying, well, the sun seems to be God, because I can't really understand it very well, now some sort of a figure, human-like figure, was attached to the image of God. And then we start to have depictions of God as male, white, and super strong, powerful, right? Which reflects the society at that time, yeah, because even now, maybe, because our society is still like a very male-dominant, misogynistic type society. That's where if there's someone out there that has more power than me, you got to be super white, super male, and super strong, right? That is the concept of God. And I'm not exaggerating. This is actually true, right? And then that concept of God lived on for hundreds and hundreds of years in our society. And that probably pushed away a lot of people from believing in God, right? That's a simple fact, right? Because even nowadays, if I tell you that God is that figure, a lot of people are going to say, like, absolutely not. I don't want anything to do with that, right? Because the real initial concept of God has been slightly lost, right? And it's interesting because it's much more credible to believe that sun is God than a human figure is God, right? So it's almost like our society kind of went backwards, right? Because in every, even like in every religion, like if you're talking to a Muslim or if you're talking to any other religion, all of them will comprehend this some sort of concept that you have this creator type figure, right? And not necessarily attached to a particular type of human-like figure, right? So that's kind of interesting because if you look at even the word God, which is derived from the Germanic words, Proto-Germanic word God, it's called to call, to invoke. That does not have a gender associated with it originally, right? Like we created that, right? We created like a male kind of gender, or we're not talking about sex because it's not like a physical body, right? But it's a gender-like concept, right? We created it. So it's socially constructed, right? We created as a male, and realistically, that has never been there. Like even in the beginning of humanity, the concept of male and female for God never existed, right? That was evolved during our development of our society. And because we have a natural tendency of describing things that we don't understand, right? That's why the idea of the pantheism, of multiple gods, or everything that we could not explain, we associated some sort of a superpower to it, right? Kind of that's where we are now. So just a little bit of a brief history of kind of where we are now, like compared to the past. But as we all know, like we are changing too, like as spirits, like we're learning, like we're changing, we're exposed to new ideas and new concepts. We started as a society to rethink a lot of stuff, like rethink, for example, our relationship with God and beliefs and faith, right? That's happening all the time with all of us. And when Spiritism comes up to play now, a little bit over 150 years ago, and then we started to develop in this group of concepts of ideas that we now understand as Spiritism. A lot of that information has changed the way we see God, because the spirits were so clear in the Spirit's book about describing what is God, right? But at the same time, showing to us that we cannot understand completely what is God. So it's an interesting concept. So in order to fix that problem, the spirits tell us, like, you can understand God by its characteristics, but not exactly what it is, right? Because it's still beyond our comprehension. So if you think about it, we're not very different from the early humans that thought the Son was God, basically. We're not very different, right? We're still the same spirits. We're incarnated at that time too, right? But we're now starting to find ways to describe God in a more, more precise way, more correct way, right? For example, in the first Spirit's book, it starts by this. It starts by asking, what is God, right? In the Spirit's book. And the spirits are going to say, God is the supreme intelligence, the first cause of all things. This is a very interesting concept, because the spirits, obviously, when they're saying this, they're bringing some information that we already know, right? They're not coming with something completely new out of the left field, like, okay, what is God? It's supreme intelligence, first cause of all things. Why is that important? I'll explain to you. So St. Thomas Aquinas, like, this is like in the 1200s, right? Came up with this 5 interesting concepts to explain what is God. See, this is not new. So when Spiritism is bringing this, it's not that Spiritism revolutionizing the way but Spiritism is actually conceptualizing ideas in a single way that we actually can understand. But it's bringing from multiple sources, and because everything comes from God. It's very straightforward, right? So St. Thomas come up with these ideas of the arguments for the existence of God. And one of the arguments, St. Thomas writes, the argument of the first cause, right? And this is what it is, right? And I'll read straight from some of St. Thomas' concepts, right? So that's in the world of sense, we find that there is an order to efficient things, to things that work well. There's always an order, right? St. Thomas explains. There's no case known, right, in which a thing is found to be the efficient cause of itself. In other words, if you have something that works really, really well, right, that thing cannot be the cause of itself. In other words, there has to be some sort of preceding element to that created or engineered that to work really well, right? That's the concept. So therefore, it is necessary to admit that a first single efficient cause must exist to explain everything that goes so well, like in our universe. So it's a simple concept, right? So it has to be something that precedes what we are in. So that's the element of the first cause, right? Which is similar to another concept that in history is very well known. It's called the unmoved mover. I know it's an interesting concept too, right? And this comes from when we started to learn about physics, right? When we started to learn about physics, we understood that, for something to move, a force has to be applied to that object, so it actually breaks the forces that are holding it in place, right? When you see a ball sitting on the ground, there's gravity, there's the air pressure on top of it, right? There's all sorts of interactions, there's friction against the floor. So it is in a stable moment, but actually multiple forces are applied to that ball for actually stay quiet in one place. So the ball is not resting, right? It's actually fighting with multiple forces in every direction. So it stabilizes itself, it doesn't move, right? So you needed some sort of external object or force to be applied to break the balance of these forces so it actually moves. So that's the theory of the unmoved mover. So something that's outside of that universe, right? In our universe, we have to put in place something that will move, in other words, to change. So that concept is one of the supports of God. So that's St. Thomas is so nice explaining this, because it would make sense even to us today. It makes sense 1200 years, and it makes sense now, right? So when the spirits come back to us and say this, the first cause of all things, they're actually pulling from that St. Thomas concept that was actually fought very hard at the church at that time, right? The church could not grasp that idea because for the church, they still believe in the creation, the Mosaic creation that's described in the early testaments, right? And now St. Thomas brings a very nice and philosophical concept to explain what is God, right? And Spiritism, the spirits are going to answer to us, bringing that same concept, most likely because St. Thomas was also part of the group of spirits that were actually answering the questions to Kardec, right? So that makes total sense, right? St. Thomas is bringing his own knowledge back to us through Spiritism now. So it's almost like you're studying school, right? And the teacher started to tell you something, and then it brings a concept, and you have no clue what's going on. And the teacher goes again and say, okay, let's try something different. I'll teach you a different way today. And then it's like you're like pass way over your head, right? And then you come in the next week, the teacher comes with like toys and put them together. This is one. So we put them together, it's two. And you're like, oh, I'm starting to get it, right? This is St. Thomas to us, right? So he came back multiple times. Now through Spiritism, he's like, okay, here's the evidence again for the fifth, sixth time in history that I'm giving you, right? And then the next question 4 on Spirit's book is like, what proof have we of existence of God? This is such a great question because almost every person that does not believe in God, right, will throw back to us some scientific evidence of the evolution of the world, which is independent of external forces, right? And we'll say, well, we don't have proof, right? So the spirits are going to answer that. The axiom which you apply in all your scientific research. So that's why, see, the spirits are going to bring our own science to debate because they already know that we will use our science against it. Right? So it turns into almost like a scientific debate at that point, right? There's no effect without a cause. Search out the cause of whatever is not the work of man, and reason will furnish the answer to your question, right? So we cannot debate whether or not, we can go through the Mosaic creation at another time, but the truth is, the idea of cause and effect is really the same as the unmoved mover, which is the same as the first cause of all things. All of these things that St. Thomas described and science describes revolves against the same concept that there's no effect without a cause. And if you believe that, then we need to have something that external from our universe, right, to be the initial cause or the initial force behind the creation of what we live on right now. So that is God. Now, what does it look like? I have no clue, right? Can we describe it? No. Is it some type of energy? Definitely not, because energy is part of creation. So you cannot be your own creation, right? Like when you see a painting, you can tell from the painting strokes who painted it, but the artist is not the paint, right? That's the same concept, right? So that we apply that exactly to God, right? You see the creation, we're living in it. And we know for a fact that something outside of this creation must have ignited the cause or the first action or the first move for this to exist. Now, this is interesting because if you think in a more scientific view of the world, right, science is going to say, well, gravity can explain, pretty much the law of gravity explains pretty much all the interactions between every single body, system, atom in the universe, that if it's taken by default, will explain, for example, the Big Bang and the interaction with the celestial bodies and everything that happened after that. And that's absolutely true. There's no question about it, right? The law of gravity can explain anywhere from the Big Bang to the interaction of the bodies and how we are created and all those things, right? There's no question about it. It doesn't explain the first cause, though. Because we can go back in time now and say, well, the Big Bang created the universe. Did it? I mean, it creates, in theory, what we live on now. But was there something before that? We cannot answer that. Are we living in some sort of a cyclic event? Possibly. In other words, our universe is going to collapse and start again. Probably. I don't know. There's theories for that, right? Who created or what created the first elements in that universe that exploded? We don't know, right? So that's where science becomes slightly more difficult to explain things. And the concept of effect without a cause becomes a lot more clear, right? Because now it doesn't matter what the law we're talking about. Yeah, the law is perfect and God is perfect. So obviously the law of gravity was created by God. There's no doubt about it, right? But what happened before that? And all of we can't tell scientifically, right? But we can definitely tell as a principle that there is a cause for every effect. And if the effect is the universe we live on, the cause is God. Period. Now, you can debate the entire day with me what God would be, because scientists love to do that, right? And believe me, I live in an environment at work that 80% of people don't believe in God. So that's interesting. So our conversations are always very interesting, right? But for the fact is, with every single scientist that I discussed my entire career, we're always going to come to the point that at the end of the conversation, the scientist will bring that same human-like concept of God to try to prove to me that God doesn't exist. And it's funny because that's the only thing we agree completely, right? I agree in any scientific debate, everyone brings back that religious concept of God that we learned, and I'm going to say I completely agree with you that does not exist. We're all the same because God is not a human figure. That's a fact, right? The creation of the universe by listed in the Gospels obviously are not a true fact. They're a representation of some sort of celestial events that happened that no one could understand at the time. So they decided to create it as a story of a couple that met, all this and blah, 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 right? That's a fact, right? So it is quite interesting. And then when we got to the real core of the message, it's like, okay, so what was there in the beginning of times? That's the point where we actually starts to between like scientists that don't believe in God and me obviously being very faithful and very much a believer, we'll start to have our big questions coming together, and science cannot explain after that, right? We can't. There's no theory for that yet, right? And that's where the philosophical concept of God that St. Thomas explains and the Spirit explains becomes the truth and the only one that can explain it. There's no doubt about it, right? No doubt about it, right? But that also creates an interesting concept about God. So now we know that God, we can't really describe it. We don't know how it looks like. We don't know anything about it other than the fact it is the cause of all things. That's all we know for a fact. Okay? But that becomes a little bit puzzling, right? And you say, oh, I believe in God, but wait, what is God again? Oh, I don't know. Right? You can start to have those questions about your own faith, right? But the spirits are very smart, right? Because they're going to actually help us address that question coming up in the Spirit's book, right? But I also like some simple ways of seeing this, right? So in the book, Our Father by the Spirit Mei Mei, right? There's a story of this Bedouin, right? That was, this is, these are simple people, right? They live in a very simple lifestyle, right? Not attached to things, praying, right? And like a very smart man. And I like the stories in the Bible. They always bring some sort of a smart, like a think they're smart guy, right? To talk to someone who believes they're not smart. And the one who is not considered smart teaches the lesson to the guy that thinks they know a lot. Sounds so much like today kind of thing. But, anyways. So, but, they would come to the Bedouin that is a very faithful person, right? And say, if they were praying incessantly, like all the time to God, right? And they was like, why you're praying so much? They asking the Bedouin, right? How can you believe, and they use the male pronouns. Right? They use like him, he for God, right? Because that's what they believe at the time. And the Bedouins going to say, well, I believe in God for his works, right? And then explained, don't you recognize the origin of a jewel based on the jeweler's trademark? Right? Makes sense, right? You know who did it. You can recognize the writer of a letter from the handwriting, right? You can affirm that a camel passed by and not a dog by just looking at the marks they leave behind on the floor, right? So can you? So that's why I know for a fact that that God exists by His works. And then the very intelligent, smart, evolved person asks, "Well, explain it better, right?" And then the Bedouin continues, "It is very easy. Look at the stars, look at the sky, look at all of that you can see above us right now. It's definitely not the work of anyone we know, right? Therefore, they can only be the work of God, and therefore, God exists." Right? Such a powerful lesson. Very simple, very straight to facts and truth, right? There's so much. So the Bedouin is exploring this philosophical concept that there's so much out there that we don't know, that our ignorance is so enormous, considering that we don't know a lot. We know, like, say, 0.001% of the whole universe, right? Or much less than that, probably, right? If you like math, you're probably going to correct me and say that's like 10 to the minus 50 or something like that, percent, fine. But we don't know much. And then for those who really think no, then that's your failure, basically. Because if you think you know a lot, by definition, you're wrong a lot, right? That's even in science, it's a very well-known fact, right? And he uses this brilliant idea of just look and think. In other words, basically look up and see how much we don't know about this, and think about there's some sort of cause of all things. And this is what I believe for a fact is God, right? And there's a lot of people that believe that, like a lot of physicists believed in that, like Isaac Newton is a good one that also believed, because he also understood the idea of the unmoved mover and the forces, right? So also another believer of that, right? So the spirits are going to say now, just to make our lives easier, right? Because now we understand that God is a very difficult concept to describe, but it's a very easy one to understand, right? That's very confusing. Yeah. So in other words, we all believe in God, right? We know it's a fact, right? God exists and we believe in it. But if we ask to explain in details what God is, then we're going to have a little bit of a hard time. That's what I'm trying to understand. So they came up with a way to help us explain that in a very easy way by creating these attributes of God. In other words, I cannot say kind of what God looks like, but I can say the attributes of God, right? Which is the same thing. It's like you're describing something, right? Oh, I'm going to describe this room, right? Even if you have a hard time conceptualizing the room, how to describe it, but you can say there's some attributes of it. There's walls and there's a ceiling and there's a floor. That's a concept of a room, right? Those are attributes of the structure, right? It's sturdy, it's protection, and you can describe it in ways that are actually not physically describing it. So this is what the spirits say. God is eternal, first thing, right? So why eternal? Because if God had a beginning, like the universe, right, it would need to have come from something else or created by something else, right? So you cannot put a timeline in God. God has no timeline, right? It's eternal. Because if it started from somewhere, there has to be something before that kind of created it, right? It's an easy concept. God is immutable, right? Because if you believe that God is perfect, and there's some lectures, there's a couple lectures that I give that are challenging themes. Sometimes I'm talking about topics that are hard to understand, like, for example, sudden deaths and deaths in a child, and something that is very hard to, right? I always bring that concept that God is perfect. And I kind of flash it in the lecture multiple times, right? And the idea is that if God is perfect, God doesn't change. because perfection means like you don't, there's no room to change anymore. That's perfection. So that's why it's immutable. And that's what brings the stability of the universe. And that's such a great concept to explain to scientists sometimes, because I can say that, well, the laws that govern the physical universe are constant. That's true. Like the laws of physics, astrophysics, right? They're constants, right? You can replicate them both on a conceptual way and actually experimental way. It's always the same, right? So that almost like a proving point of God. So, this is exactly what God means by perfection, right? It is immutable. There's no change. Because if it changed, there's no stability in the universe, right? Right? And then it wouldn't be perfect. That's very simple, right? So God is immaterial. This is a great one because everything we understand in our universe is part of creation. In other words, God cannot be part of it. So we always like to say, oh, God is like energy. No, it's not. Sorry. Definitely not. Right? Whatever type of energy you can come up with, it's part of the system that was created with our universe. So God is not it. Period. Right? So the nature of God differs from everything that we know in our, that's the Spirit saying, in our universe. And therefore, we cannot attach anything that is on a known universe to description of God. Period. Right? It's like the painter painting an artwork, right? You can't say that the painter is the yellow on the paint. It makes no sense, right? We're like, what are you talking about, right? But that's what we do with God. Say, oh, God is light. No, it's not. God's not light. God created light. Can't be light, right? The same concept. God is all powerful and it's one. And that's an interesting concept. Because if you have an all powerful, perfect God, and you have a second all powerful, perfect God, there's going to be a conflict of powerfulness in that universe, right? It's a basic concept. So the decisions of one God will interfere directly with the other one, then there's no stability in the universe anymore, right? And I know a lot of religions believe in multiple gods, and that's an interesting concept too, right? But the fact is there has to be one single cause for everything, right? And I think the deities and the special beings that are described in other religions are more related to really, really evolved spirits that are out there that also, for us, look like gods, right? If you think about a really, really super evolved spirit, we attributed some sort of a super powerful description to it sometimes in other religions, right? And I think that's what the concept comes from. So if God were not powerful above all else, it would mean that there was something more powerful, at least as powerful, right? It would mean that God might not have created all things. So maybe one God created some things, the other created other things. That's a conflict already, right? And that would not that wouldn't be a single powerful God. Now, this is the most important one. God is supremely just and good. This one we should never forget, because we do. I can tell you right now, we do. I mean, you can have examples of spirits that came to this universe and are really highly evolved and would probably maintain their same level of faith and beliefs in God no matter what circumstances they're living on. But those are really rare. Like Jesus, of course, is a great example of that, right? He's being attacked, punished, stabbed, nailed to something, like everything you can throw at him, you can possibly think in the universe. And he's praying to God to, God, like, just help these people, I suffer, but for it, I cannot me. This is like for them. I feel so bad them doing this. Like, think about this. So whatever they're throwing at him has zero effect on Christ. Zero. In a way that Christ is upset with them. He has a complete connection with God to the point that none of that, Jesus knew so much about how supremely just and good things are from God, that there was no disconnect between God's and Jesus' faith, no matter what was happening. On the contrary, he created an even more powerful connection to God at that moment to ask for help for us, right? So this is an extreme example, right? But that's exactly what we're trying to show. Because for us, which, we're all kind of learning and struggling along the way, like chugging and kind of slowing down the pace and going faster sometimes, learning stuff. But for us, as soon as something really, really unexpected, hard hit us, we're going to question our faith. And we're going to say, mentally at least, say, why are you doing this to me? That's the typical thing. Why is God doing this to me? Why is this happening? Right? We start to question, right? And I'm not saying that we should, stop doing this is bad. No, this is part of the learning process, right? Part of the learning process, right? And I use this example a lot, but this is exactly when I'm looking at my kids, right? When I'm looking at my 3-year-old kid, right, that's trying to jump 11 steps down the stairs, right? And I'm telling her that you can't do that, right? Because it's going to be bad. It's not going to work, right? No, I can do this. I know I can. It's like, no, you can't, and then she goes upstairs, and then when she has to the top, I have to go there and grab her. Say, sorry, I'm going to have to take you up the stairs. This is not safe. Oh my God, there's like this whole full-on tantrum about the whole, why are you doing this to me? This is so upsetting. I want to do this. And the cycle starts, right? And then at some point, that why, there's going to be like this breakthrough moment of 30 seconds that's like, okay, I got it, right? And we move on. And then she'll do it again on another day because she'll forget, right? That's us, right? We're constantly trying to do things that we think are perfectly fine, and they're not, because they're going against the principles of God and justice, right? They're probably going to make harm someone or create trouble for us. So there is this set of laws in the universe that will push against us every time we try to push against them, just like the stair incident, right? And at some point, we're going to be thrown something that is going to really say, hey, this is not okay. We're going to have to deal with this, right? And those wake-up calls sometimes will cause a lot of pain and confusion, right? And in those moments, we behave, spiritually speaking, as a 3-year-old, right? We'll throw a tantrum. We'll question God. We'll question the universe. We question everything because everything is wrong. And we're 100% sure that the best for us is not what's happening. And we're always wrong, period. And then eventually, we're going to have those 30 seconds wake-up calls, just like wake-up times, just like the kids, and say, well, God, maybe that's what I needed, right? And yeah, most likely that's exactly what we needed. Because we're going to question specifically the supremely just and good God. Because we can only see that tiny little time in history, right? And we forget everything we live through, and we forget everything that we still have to live, right? And this is so powerful because when we start to realize that the wisdom of the divine laws and the perfection of the universe and how God is just supremely just, good, and perfect, when we put that inside our hearts, our faith becomes stronger. And we become much stronger as a spirit to deal with things that we have to deal with. Because reality is we're still in a world that trials happen, right? We talk about this monumental thing called planetary transition, which is a very interesting concept. And yes, it's happening. But we shouldn't be worried too much about it. Because now every time we think about planetary transition and all that, we forget that actually planetary transition means that we have to do something. It's not the world has to do something. We have to do it, right? Planetary transition, yes, it's happening. Yes, more spirits of evolved nature go join here. The world is going to go into regeneration. There's going to be less trials. That's beautiful. But what about me, right? So it's very spectacular, seeing the description, the books. But then the question is like, what about me? Am I doing what I have to do to move on? Just like the planet's moving. The planet's moving. So it's like planetary transitions like this. You're going to the station, like you get in the GO train, right? They close the door 1 minute before now. I don't know if you noticed that, right? It's not the time anymore. It's interesting. So the train leaves at 5, and you come from Union Station subway, like you're literally pushing and hitting and humming everyone along the way. And then you fly away in. And then when you get there, the doors are about to close, right? And you really push hard, that last minute push. Some people make through, some people don't, right? And then you see the buzz, the train's leaving, right? And you're like, right? And then you have another chance, like in 15 or 30 minutes, another one's gonna come. But it's like the worst thing in the world just happened, right? You want to hit someone, you want to grab the door, right? You want to go run and try to the conductor, stop it, I'm here, come on. Like, it will make it such a big deal, right? But there's another train coming, right? Planetary transition is the same. Our world is changing, it's moving, it's going. It's moving slowly. It's getting off the station, right? We're the ones kind of, I'm going to catch it. I'm going to catch it. And then sometimes we don't, And don't worry, that train's going to go, another one's going to come, and we're going to continue evolution no matter what. So in a way, it's actually not a big deal. Because the problem is not the train. The problem is us. We're late. We're running behind to catch that train, right? So what the spirits are bringing with all this stuff about transition and all that is basically they're warning us that, listen, your train's going to leave a minute, close the doors a minute before. You have literally 1 minute to run all the way from Union Subway to Union Go, right? You don't have a lot of time. So if I were you, I would read the books about planetary transition and figure out that you got to do something, I know, total off topic. I'm not talking about planetary transition today. But going back to God supremely just and good, that's the same thing, right? So if you do believe that God is just, no matter how horrible the situation we might be thinking about, there's always an explanation behind all of that we typically miss, right? But is the way to go, believe me. And we always can make the right decisions even in the hardest times if our faith is there, right? Now, don't feel bad if you question, because I do that too, right? I'm not here because I'm like this sort of a super powerful spirit that decided to come here and lecture everyone about the perfection of God. I do all of this stuff that I'm talking about, probably more than most people. I don't know. I question a lot too, right? But at least I think the more you read and understand this, it makes it easier for you to accept your own mistakes and actually move on, right? And I think that's what we're learning together. Right? How can we get better? Like, how can we move this crank, right, and get it to move forward, right? So the spirits are going to continue asking very interesting questions, right, about this concepts, right? And for example, they're going to say in question 17 of the Spirit's book, can humans know the origin of things? The creation, right? And the spirits are going to say no. Like, it's like, let's say, going to my kids, right? Daddy, what? It's like, sorry, but no. Like, it's like the worst thing in the world. I'm so ready to know this, Daddy. I'm like, no, buddy. Don't worry, you will, right? Not now, right? It's us, spiritually, right? Same. Like, we always want to know, but it's not the time, right? And the spirits are going to say, on earth, God does not allow everything to be revealed to them. Makes total sense. Right? I don't want to have a conversation about astrophysics to my 3-year-old. It will go like straight on top of her head. Makes no sense. And she's going to be like, huh? Like, what? Can I play that? He's like, yeah, sure. You can go play. So that's the kind of, like, everything comes at its own time. And spiritually speaking, we are the kids. So there are things we can't understand. And it's totally fine. Right? Totally fine. I resigned to that. I'm totally fine with that. Okay? Can't humans grasp some of nature's secrets through scientific investigation? Great question. So science has been given to them, to their advancement in all matters, but they cannot go beyond the limits set by God. Which is interesting, is that the idea of the limits here is actually our own limits, right? It's not that there's some sort of super force out there saying, like, stopping things from happening. No. like our own capacity that evolves with time, right? Just like scientists many hundreds of years ago brought concepts and were killed by it. I don't know if you guys remember, right? Now we're bringing more concepts into science, and every time a new concept comes in, there's an immediate pushback against it, and then things move very slowly with time. So that's how we evolve, right? And that's how science evolves, right? So the more humans are allowed to grasp such mysteries, the more they should admire the power and wisdom of the Creator. However, whether through pride or through weakness, their own minds often render them victims of illusion, and they pile theory upon theory. Every day, they see many errors, the mistakes they've done in the past, and they're taking for truth, and how many truths they have dismissed as errors. And this is a great summary of science. These realizations are further blown by their pride, right? I could use this in any of my science seminars to any of my kids, students, and that's absolutely true, right? So science learns by mistakes, basically. That's exactly how we do. We try it, we replicate it. Sometimes we do it. Someone comes and tests it and fails, and then we kind of just start this, discussion and arguments about who's right, who's wrong, and then pride gets in the way, and then eventually, collectively, we move on with an acceptable theory, right? But it takes time, right? It's not as simple as it sounds, right? So, I'm almost out of time, but there's a couple of things that we may still be able to address, right? So, in Spiritism, both Genesis and Spirit's book bring this concept of God, the creation of the universe, as we know, divided in a spirit principle, a spiritual principle, which are the spirits, us, right? And the universal cosmic fluid, which generates everything that is material. So there's two different things, right? And then all of this is bound by what we call the divine laws, right? Which kind of unites all of this spiritual principle, universal cosmic fluid, and the material principle together in that universe, right? So everything material, organic life, matter, energy, wave, any type of energy out there is all contained within this universal cosmic fluid, right? But spirits are separate from it, right? A different type of creation. And God is in the outside of all of this, right? Being the creator of that entire universe. Now, to interact the spirit with the physical material matter, we have this intermediate type of body that we call perispirit, right? That allows us to fully interact with the physical universe. And by combining this all together, this is who we are right now. We have a physical element, we have a perispiritual element, and we have the spirit as us. This, who we are, can actually co-create the universe. What do you mean? So we're giving the ability to change things, right? To improve things. So we can actually change our world, right? We can create new technology. We can move things around. We can create tools to help us, right? So by doing that, we are actually co-creating. In other words, God created the universe, and we can make changes along the way, right? That gives us a lot of responsibility, right? Because those changes that we can make along the way on the universe can have direct consequences on our own selves, right? When we incarnate again in this own universe, right? So this is an interesting concept, and I think it's important to reflect on it today, particularly because we're kind of going through some really challenging times from a economical, emotional, philosophical, if you think about the point of view, but also spiritual, right? We collective working together in this planet to make it easier to conceptualize just the planet we are right now. We are working as a group together, right? Changing things and moving together and learning with each other, right? Or in other words, co-creating or managing this slight little rock that we live on, right? In the universe we call Earth, right? And we got to do a good job doing it because, the actions that we take now will have effects, even our own selves, when we come and incarnate again in this planet, right? So also gives us the importance of thinking about responsibility, but responsibility not necessarily from someone else's action, our own response to those actions. We like to blame. I don't know if do you guys notice that we like to blame other people all the time. I don't know. Did you do that? I don't know. It happens with me. I don't know if you guys have the same thing. But every time something bad happens, we're like, oh, that we would point a finger. We create this fuss about, it's this and that person, whatever happened. We rarely think about how do we respond? What are we doing? Like here, maybe not physical. Maybe we're beyond the point of hitting someone in the face. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's still there. But here in your thoughts, I'm pretty sure your thoughts are going kind of crazy right now, because mine are. If you're not, please talk to me and tell me what you're doing, because my mind is going full on over the 100%, like right now, thinking about what's going to happen in the next 4 years, right? About everything, about we as a country, we as society, we as economy, we're thinking about it, right? But it's important to think about it and not generate this negative type of revengeful energy in your minds. Because if you're doing that, you're connecting to that same negativity that is the cause of all these things. So, in other words, you're co-creating some sort of negativity. It's bad. So be mindful that no matter how challenging things are looking like, it will be fine at some point. And it's our responsibility to do things that do not make it worse. And there's many ways of seeing this, but most importantly, we in our own minds and where we're thinking, don't project negativity to the universe, right? Because we can fail badly doing that. And I was actually talking to Joyce this morning having breakfast, and she's talking to me. It's so hard not to think in a super negative way about certain individuals right now. It's so hard to not say, I wish this happened. And I'm like, damn, yes. It's so hard to not project some sort of vengeful energy against people or things, right? Remember that God is supremely just and good. That we forget that, right? So I forgot. But I can tell you one thing, even in the example that Shiku gave to us, which is a lot more closer to our reality, right? When his neighbor killed his dog because the dog was apparently suffering, right? Or sick. And then he was like, oh my God, it's the dog I loved, Why did you do that? And the energy started to project against the neighbor, right? The same idea, negativity, right? And then Emmanuel would come and say, hey, stop. You can actually go there and find the best thing you can get that's going to make your neighbor happy. And that's going to end this energy battle that you guys are sending to each other, this darts of energy, right? So that's kind of what we need to do now, right? Knowing that God's supremely just and good, knowing that the timeline of events that we're looking at will pass. This shall all pass, right? And we have to obviously work together and stand together and do the best for everyone in our society, but also not do that with sending these darts of negativity to the whole universe. Because if you do that, you're part of the problem, not physically, but mentally and spiritually. And the type of spirits that are going to come and connect to those darts of negativity that you're sending are not happy spirits. I can tell you that. And they're not going to influence you positively. And they'll be energized by our own energy that we're submitting. And we're actually making things worse for a fact. Okay? So that's the last little bit I wanted to add there. So let us all, whenever we feel that that rage is building, that we're reading the news constantly and kind of picking up those energies and kind of building that storm inside of us, please don't. That is not helping, right? Let's try to substitute that with sending good thoughts, good vibes, so that the spirits that are trying to guide our neighbors in the south and other places in the planet right now can use our own positivity to embolden their response and help things move smoothly. We are responsible for this too, collectively, because we're in the same boat, right? The same planet, same tiny little rock in the universe, right? So let's kind of work together, knowing that God is perfect, and whatever is happening, there has to be a definitive reason behind it. Okay? Thank you, everyone. Any questions, any comments, anything? We have a few minutes left.
I
Well,
love this topic.
yeah.
So I haven't been reading a lot philosophy.
Yeah.
Actually, and Stoicism, etc.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because they try to evolve the concept of God in our minds.
Yeah. Yeah.
So starting from Zeus,
Yes, exactly.
the planets,
Yeah.
the Celtics,
Mhm.
etc.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
Resonating to nature.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
As you said. But there was a very important concept missing.
Mhm.
There was no good or bad at that point.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
The concept of moral came with philosophy.
Mhm.
Before was just you had to worship God to have rain and to harvest.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Mhm.
So the moral evolved with
Evolved, yeah.
philosophy. And after philosophy, the concept evolved to religions.
Mhm.
And then the scientific method
Mhm.
arrived
Mhm.
and start blaming religion.
Yes, for sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And I would stop here. But then when we see what Jesus said, be humble.
Mhm.
It's like the concept of Jewish God, Hindu God, Polynesian God, it's all of them are kind of different concepts or trying to explain something.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be better for you to say, I won't explain and you cannot know?
Yeah.
In my opinion, it's I have
Yeah.
to be humble enough to understand that it's so out of my concept
Yep.
that I prefer this answer
Yeah.
than something
Yeah.
that it's trying to
Yeah.
organize God on my mind.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And then comes my dad.
Mhm.
And I asked once that how do you pray?
Mhm.
And he said, well, I cannot pray. It's like I do not have a picture of God on my mind.
Yeah.
But he said, so therefore I picture something that comes from God.
Yep.
So he used to pray thinking about a tree.
Mhm.
So he imagined a tree and he pray for a tree or an image that's very beautiful,
Yeah.
sunny, etc. And I love this concept actually. That's a little bit of what I do today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's so difficult to do not connect those two things, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's like the humbleness.
For sure.
It's interesting because is Jesus saying for us to be humble for our own good or for someone else's good, right?
Mhm.
I'm 100% sure that he's trying to do this
Yeah.
for us,
Mhm.
to helping us,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So being humble and do not try to
Yeah.
lose your time
Yeah.
trying to understand something that it's so beyond your concept,
Yeah.
right?
That's exactly perfect, because that's exactly what the spirits are. If you carefully read what the spirits are answering Kardec, that is exactly the same concept, right? They're nailing it back, saying that we can't explain this. Like you don't have no clue what you're talking about. There's no words in your vocabulary that I can use to pick this from. There's no concept that in your brain that I can pick from and I can explain this to you. So why are you wasting so much time really trying to define kind of what it is, and you just not be humble enough to accept that there's a moving, like there's a cause and effect concept that we all grasp and just move on with that, right? Which is kind of the same thing.
Yeah. So we tend to believe that we are smart enough.
Yeah.
So we are not humble enough.
Yeah.
To realize
Yeah.
that we are not smart enough. So think about
Yeah.
a worm or ant
Yeah.
beside a car.
Yeah.
They look the car is they don't car and mountain and tree are all
Yeah.
the same.
Yeah.
So they don't even understand that car has oil, fluids,
Yeah.
etc. It's like I don't.
Yeah.
So I think we are in this stage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that's why the idea of conceptualizing God by these principles that are immutable. Not exactly what God is, but understanding some basic concepts about it. I think that a lot. That's the best. That's what we can do right now, right? And I thought going to the being humble, I think it's so interesting because if you that's why I like because sometimes I always thought about myself, because I'm in science forever. Like I've been training science since I went to school, right? So that's my world, right? I talk to people, I work on it, I run a lab, right? I do it. This is my daily thing, right? And then I always catch myself reading these books and picturing the super smart people that think they're so smart, right? In the Bible, in the books, every story is right. There's always someone's going to say, I'm a scientist, and I'm like, oh my God, I hope I'm not that scientist, I can't be that, right? Because that teaches me a lot about being humble enough. And science teaches me that too. Because every time you run an experiment, it's like I realize how much we don't know, right? And I think that's so powerful as a message of being humble. It's like I actually have a proof every day of how much ignorance I have still about so many things, right? And maybe little things, right? That we know, oh, I know this really well. Like, I'm good at that. And then you get a result back. I'm like, oh, maybe I don't know this that much, right? So I have that experience, but it's exactly what you're talking about, like being humble in a way that knowing that actually we don't know most things, right? And it's fine. Like we don't know most things anyways, in a lot of subjects, in our daily lives. Like, I think it was Julia asking me one of those days. She asked me I can't remember now, but she asked me a question that was really genuine. She was like, Daddy, how does this work? And I thought about it. I'm like, actually, I have no clue how does this work. I like beyond my mind, and I think I'm so smart, right? I'm nothing. Like literally, I know how cells move a little bit. That's my work, right? But like beyond that, like what do I know? Like I know nothing. I think being humble in that way, 100% helps us deal with that struggle, right? With like, what is God? What is my faith? My faith is bound to that image of God? No, right? Our faith should not be bound to that, right? But basically having the basic understanding that between the cause and the fact, my faith is anchored in the fact that there has to be some, and God is so nice because he brings this to us when we incarnate. There's a little seed inside of us say, this is what exists. So we all know, you can deny it, but it's there, right? Yeah, so that's a great example of being humble. Yeah.
Just want to comment to that. I think it's nice that you brought three concepts together that are
Yeah.
important. So first, the concept that you said is the most important. That's God is justice and like good and just.
Yeah.
But also the concept of being co-creators, therefore responsible for our actions.
Yes. Yeah.
Because I had people who asked me questions. It was even before what happened in the South with our neighbor.
Yeah.
Was even before this asked, how about like we have so many people in positions of power, political and financial, that pretty much help to destroy this planet, right? And the question for the person, like, okay, but if God is just, why he allows those people to do that? Why he doesn't do something to them? I was kind of say, why doesn't like kill them or
exactly. Let's get rid of it.
Take them out of that power, right?
Yeah.
And then my answer to this person is because it's not here to correct our own mistakes.
Yeah.
Because we put those people in power. We voted for them. We, as a society, but as a society, we did. It's a democratic society, right?
Yeah.
And we are part of it. Like, so basically, we make mistakes, and then when things don't go well, we want God to go there and fix our mistakes.
Yeah.
That would just be spoiled kids that, I can do whatever I want because someone comes here and corrects my mistakes for me. And mom and daddy corrects my mistakes, so I don't need to be responsible.
Yeah.
We are responsible because we're co-creators.
Yeah.
And that is part of God's justice, right? But each one is going to have to correct their own mistakes.
We can fix our own actions, right? We can fix our own thoughts. And I think that's what people don't realize is that when we say, so there's the disconnect between not doing bad things, but don't realizing that we're actually wishing them.
Yes.
That is the same, Kudos for you for not actually acting on them. But the fact that they are in your mind tells exactly who you are. and don't fight with that. And I that's something, that's my exercise, quite frankly. When the thoughts start to come into my mind, I'm like, damn, this is who I am. This is who I am, right? And it's hard, but you have to deal with that, right? It's like, okay, fine. So I have to see this always, everything happens interconnectedly, right? Because how do I learn about myself if I'm not exposed to a trigger, right, that is gonna take out of me that same feeling? How am I gonna be so upset with discrimination if discrimination is not happening around me? How? So that's why we're on Earth. Yes, there's discrimination. So yes, it should trigger me. And yes, I should do something about it, right? But you see, that cycle only exists if a discrimination occurs still. Because if we're in a perfect world and nothing that happened, I'll be great. It's like, oh, it's like I'm such a perfect being, right? Not realizing that all these things are inside of me and I'm just literally keeping them super nice and protected, right? Until something triggers me. So that's why this is happening. There's always a reason for this to happen. And in every war, in every conflict, obviously God doesn't want war to happen. Of course not. War is our creation, but it is a collective response that works as a trigger, and it elicits a fundamental counter response that will eventually lead to some sort of learning, right? So this is an interesting concept too, right? And I think it's very important for us to think about it. Yeah.
But unfortunately, a lot of people have heard more than times see if God existed, He wouldn't allow these things to happen.
Yeah,
So
the idea, yeah,
we created,
it's like a sheriff, right?
We created, but it's His fault that's
Yeah,
happening.
yeah,
Because
exactly.
If He existed, He wouldn't allow that to happen.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a way of saying I have nothing to do with
Yeah,
that.
it's not my business. Yeah, talk to God.
Yeah.
He'll figure it out. Yeah. Anyways, thanks, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. So, yeah. All right. Thank you again, Marco, for the lecture. Thank you for all of you that was with us over the internet, and hoping to see you here next week with us again.